Good morning. The subcommittee will come to order. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to my colleagues, our witnesses, and the audience as we begin the fiscal year 2017 appropriations process. Today is the Interior and Environment Subcommittee's first oversight hearing of the year. Chief Tidwell and Mr. Dixon, I would like to welcome you back to the subcommittee. We're pleased to be able to hear from you regarding the fiscal year 2017 budget request for the United States Forest Service. Similar to last year, the President requests a total of $4.9 billion of discretionary funding for the Forest Service FY 2017. This is $150 million less than FY 16 enacted. A total of $2.5 billion is requested for wildland fire management. This represents nearly 50% of the entire Forest Service budget. In addition, a budget cap adjustment of $864 million is requested. This subcommittee continues to be concerned about the costs of fighting wildfire and the effects it has on the Forest Service budgets, programs, and management. Technically, the 2015 fire season is considered below normal at 93% of the 10-year average for the number of wildfires reported. However, the statistic belies a devastating reality. In 2015, more than 68,000 fires burned more than 10 million acres, causing an agonizing loss of life, destroying more than 4,600 homes and other properties, devastating local and regional landscapes and communities. The toll on our firefighters and supporting staff was also severe. According to the National Interagency Coordination Center, the requests for firefighting resources were right or exceeded the 10-year average, and the requests for air support were fulfilled, exceeded their averages. So I'd like to thank you, Chief Tidwell, for the administration's efforts to change the way we budget for wildfires. I'd also like to thank Congressman Simpson, who has his dramatic entrance here, for keeping the pressure on Congress to address the issue. As of yesterday, I understand Mike has convinced 145 of our colleagues to co-sponsor his bill, including every member of this subcommittee. While the issue of how to fund firefighting costs seems to dominate most discussions about the Forest Service, there are numerous other issues, including air asset management, law enforcement, land acquisition, and basic budgeting, and program management, among others, that need to be attended to. The Forest Service must demonstrate that it's accountable, transparent, and able to improve the condition of its forests while managing unpredictable fire seasons. This is a difficult challenge. I realize it's not entirely in your hands. Congress must provide the financial resources and address policy matters that limit the agency's ability to manage the nation's forests. But some parts are in your hands, especially accounting, budgeting, and program management. I look forward to talking to you more about them today as we prepare the House bill for fiscal year 2017. Chief, you and the entire Forest Service staff deserve our appreciation for your work on behalf of the American people and our nation's forests. We know you all care deeply for our forests and communities that depend on them. So I thank you, and now I'm happy to yield to the gentlelady from Minnesota, Ms. McCollum, for any opening remarks she might make.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And good morning, Chief Tidwell and Mr. Dixon, and thank you for being with us. The U.S. Forest Service is charged with sustaining healthy, diverse, and productivity on our nation's forest and grasslands, and that's no small deed. The responsibilities associated with managing 193 million acres of National Forest System lands are significant, and the Forest Service has established itself as a leader in natural resource, conservation, and recreation management. With these responsibilities in mind, the fiscal year 2017 budget request is very conservative. The costs associated with fighting wildland fires continues to rise, and frankly, I'm concerned that those costs are being met at the expense of other important programs. For example, the budget proposes to cut invasive species research program. Invasive species are a major threat to our lands. I'll just give one example. We're watching as emerald ash borer decimates American forests, killing 99% of the trees it infects. That infestation is a wake-up call to the devastation invasive species can reap. We need to be investing more and not less in such programs. And how do we do more? President Obama's budget gives us a way forward in reforming the way we fund wildfire costs. And I support that proposal. We need a more reliable way of funding wildfires that does not continually threaten other important Forest Service programs. Last year, as the chairman has been pointing out, wildland fire costs made up more than 50% of the Forest Service budget, 50% of the Forest Service budget. And experts predict that if we do not take action to address these problems, it will exceed 67% by the year 2025. This imbalance would translate to nearly a $700 million reduction to non-fire programs. Every member of the subcommittee is a co-sponsor of our colleague's Chairman Simpson's wildfire disaster funding bill. And last year, the Senate Appropriations Mark included reforms that are called for in the Simpson bill. So I have to say that I'm particularly disappointed that the final omnibus did not include emergency or disaster cap adjustments. So I hope we can work together, whether it's through the authorizers or on this committee, to solve this problem. If we continue down the path of underfunding programs to manage wildfires, we jeopardize the health and the long history that we've had of having great American national forests. Chief Tidwell and the Forest Service, you face difficult challenges to fulfill your mission in this time of limited budgets. I look forward to your testimony on how the agency is going to cope with these challenges, and I thank you once again for being here today, and thank you for the courtesy of the remarks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And Chief, you're recognized for your statement.
Well, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member McCollum, members of the subcommittee, thank you again for having the opportunity to discuss our FY17 budget request. As you've both mentioned, this is basically a similar request to last year's budget request, which forces us to make some very hard choices about where to spend the limited resources. It does allow us to continue to increase our pace in scale of restoring the nation's forests. This budget request will allow us to treat 2.9 million acres to restore forest health and watershed conditions. It allows us to decommission 2,000 roads that are no longer needed and are just contributing soil into our streams. It also allows us to restore 3,450 miles of stream to address those aquatic needs and to improve the fisheries, and also well-produced 3.2 billion board feet of timber. We do this by maintaining our 23 collaborative forest landscape restoration projects, and then be able to continue to expand our work through the Stewardship Contracting Authority that you provided a few years ago, and also with the Farm Bill authorities when it comes to insect and disease. And also we're making good progress with the states around the Good Neighbor Authority. These are the things that are allowing us to be able to continue to move forward and be able to get more work done every year, even though today we have 30% fewer employees than we did the last time we ever harvested 3 billion board feet. It also allows us to treat 1.6 million acres of the highest priority areas in our wildland-urban interface, plus another 400,000 acres of areas outside that we need to address hazardous fuels. Our state and private programs are taking an approach to use more of a landscape scale restoration approach, where we can do a better job to work with our state foresters to be able to address issues on private forested lands, but across much larger landscapes. And with our research, which is just essential that we be able to maintain our research and development operations, but we're focusing on insect and disease, invasives, fire behavior, and then also to be able to expand and develop new markets for wood. If we do not find markets for the biomass that needs to be removed off our national forests, it's going to be more and more expensive for us to be able to restore these forests. We're also asking for an increase in law enforcement, and this is focused on helping us to reduce and clean up the marijuana grows. The data that we have that shows that if you just get in there and stop the grow, there's a highly likelihood they're going to be back in there in a few years, versus if you can get in there and clean out everything and take away all the infrastructure, et cetera, that there's less likelihood they're going to come back. So our request would allow us to be able to do a better job to clean up those sites. And this budget provides the suppression resources that we need. It provides the air tankers, it provides the helicopters. We'll have 21 large air tankers on contract. We'll have over 300 helicopters, over 1,000 engines, and our Type 1 crews that are necessary to respond not only to our fires, but to the fires across the landscape on other federal jurisdiction and also with our state and local partners. I appreciate the support from this subcommittee and from Mr. Simpson when it comes to finding a way to reform how we pay for fire suppression. I appreciate the additional funding you provided in the FY16 budget into the FLAME account. But I think we're all aware of the history that FLAME is not the answer. We have to find a way to be able to move past this. You understand the issues. We got to find a alternative to the 10-year average cost. We need to find a way so that we never have to deal with transferring funds, shutting down operations, putting people out of work every year. And this takes away your discretion. For you to be able to meet the public's needs with your limited, with the limited resources we have today, it takes away your discretion. That all you can do is really, pay for fire. One statistic that I want you to be thinking about, that from FY15 to FY17, with our 10-year average, that 10-year average calculation will go up $237 million. And we still have 2 more years in the 10-year average that are the less expensive years, less than $1 billion. So there's going to be 2 more years that are still going to hit that 10-year average mark. So I just point that out to, I guess, first of all, reinforce the good work you're doing and also to thank you. And I'll tell you, we are committed to do everything we can to work with you, to be able to find a way to be able to reform this so that it really provides, I think, the answer to a lot of the other problems that we're dealing with. So, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the time you've given us this morning to be able to address this subcommittee, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you. And we're going to start with Mr. Stewart out of courtesy. He has a hearing he needs to attend, so I'm going to recognize him first in my time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You're very generous. And to the other members, thank you for your consideration. Chief, thank you. We've had many conversations. We appreciate what you do. I recognize you've got a tough job. But I hope that we can, through this conversation and through these hearings, come to a meeting of the minds on some issues that are incredibly important to me and to my district. I represent the 2nd District in Utah. Nearly 80% of my district controlled by federal lands, 4 million acres of Forest Service lands. And to say that tension is simmering in my district would be a gracious understatement, as I know you know. And honestly, some of the things that have made those tensions rise are things that I think we could have avoided and should have avoided. And they deal with 3 things, and I want to talk about them very quickly. The first one will really be just kind of a yes/no. And that's this issue with the labor rule and overtime for outfitters and guides. So the second one, more deeply felt, are the grazing and the water rights. So let me ask specifically the first one, and that is, and I know you know the background on this, and so again, I'll just be very quickly. Do you agree that the intention of Congress on that was very clear and that the Forest Service would not proceed with the implementation of the labor rule?
I understand the intent. For me, it's clear. We are having discussions with our attorneys on that, but I definitely understand your intention.
Okay. And I appreciate that you saying that for you it's clear, that we agree on that, and I think that we do agree. Hopefully we can get others to recognize that as well. The more prickly issues, if we could, and I won't be the first one who talks about this, I'm sure, but I could give you examples of people sitting in this room who are here today who have had personal, firsthand experiences. For example, a family operation that had been accused by really a very aggressive environmental group of overgrazing, and they voluntarily gave up half of their allotment. They had requested a hearing with the Forest Service. They were given 15 minutes to present their case. The Forest Service then spent an hour and a half behind closed doors with this environmental group, and left them in a very, very precarious situation. This isn't a huge corporate farm. This is a family farm, as I grew up ranching. Help me understand what I can go back and tell my constituents to assure them that the Forest Service isn't out and tipping the scales in the favor of radical environmental groups against family farms and ranches.
Well, my response is simply that, grazing is part of multiple use, and we believe it's not only a legitimate use, but it helps to maintain our communities, and it also helps to maintain the wildlife habitat and to maintain open space. When we lose the ranching community, we lose a lot of benefits that the public takes for granted. So what I'd like you to share is that, we're the strongest supporters that they have when it comes to grazing. And if we need to do a better job to make sure that we are very transparent in being able to deal with these issues, then we want to take that on. I am,
And Chief, I have to say, not you perhaps individually, but your organization does need to do a better job at that, because there's a very broad perception that the scales are tilted against them. And if you want to come talk to people who are very, very angry right now, come to my district, and we've got to find a way to diffuse that. We've already seen the outcome of that, and it's not going to get better as long as they feel like the federal government has the boot on the throat of these family ranches.
well, we're also, the governor's office has extended his staff to be able to work with us, to be able to sit down and actually have the governor's office be able to kind of bring people together to maybe, tamper down some of the tension and have the dialogues and discussions that we really need. So I appreciate the governor's staff, the governor being able to step up and help in this situation. So I'm looking forward to that we can move forward. I did meet with several of your county commissioners this past weekend. We had similar discussions about some ideas about, okay, how can we just change this so that it's very clear that we, of course, need to listen to everyone, but at the same time, we need to do this in a transparent process. And our intent is, without any question, is to maintain livestock grazing.
Well, and we appreciate that, and you're right, the governor has been active. We actually held hearings down there about a month ago through Chairman Bishop and the Resources Committee, and those things do make a difference. It gives the people there that are impacted by this the feeling that at least they're being heard, and that they're not being ignored, and that they're not given 15 minutes and then an environmental group given an hour and a half, again, behind closed doors. The third thing, if I could, and I don't see a clock, I'm not sure how much time we have, but okay, I'll go quickly. The same perception, not only about grazing rights, but about water rights as well. And individuals being told that in order to renew their grazing, they've got to give up some of their water allocations. And my heavens, you do that in the West, and that's like giving up your lifeblood. You can't survive without those water allocations. And again, I know individuals, some sitting here in this room, tell me firsthand knowledge of them being told, we'll reallocate your grazing, but you've got to work with us on your water rights. Please tell me that that's not a policy that the Forest Service would defend.
We've had a policy, this policy has been around for decades, and it's there as kind of as a security if there's a potential threat of the water being taken away from the land so we couldn't continue grazing. So this is an issue that we want to work with folks on, is to find a better solution, because our intent is one thing, that is to be able to keep the water with the land, because when you take the water, we're no longer grazing. So that's our sole intent. We ought to be able to keep the water there so we can continue grazing. So I think this is an opportunity we have to be able to move forward together, because when I talk to ranchers, they agree with me. They got to keep the water there, because if you take the water, they can't use the land. Yeah. And so I think this is one of those issues where I think there is agreement on it. We just need to get to work to be able to make some changes so that we are together like this. And I think in your state, we may have even some additional benefit because of some of the state law that's in place that actually may be very helpful.
Well, Chief, thank you, and Chairman, again, thank you for letting me kind of jump ahead of the line. And I'll just conclude by saying I grew up ranching, and this isn't like most other jobs in the country. There's a deep, deep culture that means more than this isn't just a job. And if we don't make some progress in helping these folks feel like they're not being ignored and, in fact, being abused by the federal government, then we're going to have situations out there that just become worse. So thank you for working with us on those, Chief. Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Ms. McCollum.
Thank you. Before I begin my question, I just want to revisit quickly a topic that we discussed last year, and this is a controversial mining proposals that the Forest Service is dealing with across the country. And in northern Minnesota, the copper nickel mining poses a threat to the water quality of Voyageurs National Park and the Boundary Waters Canoe Wilderness Area. And I understand that the Forest Service is working closely with the Bureau of Land Management on these issues, and I appreciate the work that you and your staff at the Forest Service are doing to protect these treasures in our park system that all of America enjoys, the Boundary Waters and Voyageurs National Park. And I believe it's imperative that we find a way to better balance the cost of fire suppression with the resources needed in other programs that also help you protect, as I said earlier, what we expect you to be able to do in the Forest Service. However, your budget warns that the shift is eroding our ability to serve Americans in a myriad of ways, such as delivering clean air and clean water. So I'm troubled by this statement because more than 180 million Americans depend on drinking water that flows through our national forests. And that accounts for 20% of the nation's clean water supply. And that's an estimated value of $7.2 billion a year. So your budget request states that currently 48% of the watersheds in the national forest and grasslands are not functioning properly, and I think that goes a little bit to the discussion that you were having with my colleague, Mr. Stewart. So along that line, our country has a legacy of abandoned mine lands that pose safety risks to public health, leach pollutions that contaminate soil and water. 39,000 abandoned mine sites on our national forest lands. Over a third of them produce minerals like arsenic and lead that can have significant impacts on human health and the environment. So the budget proposes to increase funding to mitigate safety risks to abandoned mines by $4 million. Additionally, the budget requests another $4 million to increase managing environmental restoration of these abandoned mines. So I'm pleased that the administration is requesting these increases, but as you know, we need to do more. So the timeline for your environmental restoration is even more disarming for me. According to the budget request, with what you've been able to request, only 150 sites have been cleaned up since 1998. At this rate, it's just unacceptable, Chief. So what steps is the Forest Service taking to create a path forward that will accelerate the mitigation and restoration so that we do not leave these abandoned mines to be a burden for the next generations to pay for, quite frankly, with their tax dollars and put their drinking water at risk?
Well, you stated the inventory. That was our first step, is for us to have an accurate inventory about just how many that we have, and then also what's the risk, so that we can actually prioritize where is the top place we need to spend our limited resources to address this problem. And yes, we need to be doing more. We're also working with partners. We're working with the states on these issues because they too share that the concern of the contamination of both surface water and groundwater from these. The other thing that we've done is we've put in place direction that from now on we're going to make sure that we have enough funding, require enough funding to make sure we can clean up these properties after the mining's been done. That's been one of the problems that created this backlog. In the past, we never fully understood the complications of some of these mining operations, and so we didn't have the funds in place. We didn't have the bond, an adequate bond in place, so that when these mines were abandoned, there was never enough money to clean it up. From now on in the future, we're going to require that we have there's enough funding available to be able to take care of these problems, even if it's over the next 100 years. So we shouldn't be adding more to it. So that's the first thing. But then going back, this is just another example of the things that the public's demanding. The public, we need to be able to do this, and we have to find a way to be able to expand getting more of this work done. And I feel good about what we're doing. I feel good about the inventory, but there's no question we need to be doing more. So it's just another example. I wish I could be here next year and be able to talk to you about, okay, we fixed the fire reform issue, fire suppression funding. We're on a different track there. We have some flexibility now that we can talk about where we need to make some strategic investments to be able to address these issues.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Chief, I have a couple questions on the wildland fire and the budget cap adjustment. Your FY17 budget again proposes to establish a new budget framework for wildland fire management program. A total of $874 million in discretionary funds is requested for fire suppression, and an additional $864 million is requested through a budget cap adjustment. On that, can you share first any lessons you learned from this last fire season in 2015?
Well, number one lesson, the burden that was put on the agency to have to transfer the amount of money we did in such a short period of time is just really something that I'm so impressed that our folks were able to do it. They were working often 24 hours a day trying to shift money and to be able to keep us from always having the funds available to pay the bill. So that's, when I think about the millions of dollars that was wasted from having to deal with that transfer and all the potential for accounting mistakes to be made with moving money around so quickly, et cetera. So that's one of the concerns, that definitely a lesson that I learned. The second part of it is that, to predict the fire season is very difficult. Our scientists are, telling us, what it is for this coming year. We're here talking about FY17. So for FY16 right now, I can tell you with 90% confidence that this coming fire season is going to cost somewhere between $604 million and $1.7 billion. I'm 90% confident it's going to be there. That's for 16. And we're talking 17 here. So that's the other reality, is that you just can't budget for wildland fire. I mean, so that's the other thing that just hit home. And then the other part of it, even last year's fire season, it started off being a little less active in what we predicted. But then, everything where all those drought maps showed where we had that extensive drought, part of it was in your state. It all came true. I mean, we had the big fires in California, Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and a lot of other places in the country. And so it played out just like it was predicted. But then when people saw how much it costs, it's like, what? I mean, how can you spend that much money? Well, 27,000 people. And, and we're responding to our fires and at the same time supporting the state and, the county, with their fires. So I'll tell you, those are some of the lessons that I learned. The numbers that we put forward in our budget are numbers that would, one, prevent any need to ever transfer for funding. So we would eliminate that wasteful practice. And then also, we're not going to spend the money if we don't need it. And we want to be able to show you without any question, this is what it costs, for each fire. And we are, and we manage those costs. We also are making very good decisions that when we cannot be effective, we're not going to put people in harm's way. And I don't care how much people are talking to us, directing us, that we're not going to do that because it's just wasteful. And we made some really good decisions last year, and a couple of them, yes, we got large fires. But I trust our folks on the ground when they say, I'm not going down into that canyon. We're not going to ask them to go into that canyon. Those professionals know when we cannot be effective because of the drought conditions, et cetera. So those are just, some of the lessons that I learned. But we just have to have a different approach, because we'll come in here with our best science, but the reality, I just cannot predict the exact how much money we need for FY17. It's going to be a big range. And then the worst part of it, if we're just, having millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars that are just sitting there and we don't need it when we have a lot of other pressing needs, as a taxpayer, I'm not okay with that. So those are some of the lessons that I learned.
Yeah. Okay, and you believe then that this budget cap adjustment will help improve the nation's forests. It will help you, and this is You laid that out in your budget request?
Yes, and it does it through a couple of ways. One, it stops the transfer, so that's off the table. We don't have to worry about that anymore. We can plan on getting our work done. It slows down the growth of the 10-year average, and also it does free up some constraint for the Appropriations Committee for you to make a decision about how that could be used. So that's the other way that it would also help us potentially be able to be proactive, to be able to make the investments. We will be glad to provide you with a long list of all the successes that we have every year for where we get in there and do the thinning before the fire starts. We are effective with our suppression. We reduce the risk to our firefighters. We have less homes that get burned. And then the watersheds recover so fast because we just don't have the severity. The solution is simple. It's just large. We have to continue to increase the number of acres. And I feel good today that between our restoration efforts and the work that we're doing on hazardous fuels, we're treating over 4.5 million acres every year. A decade ago, we were treating about 400,000. So we made significant advances in the work that we're doing. And we just need to be able to continue to maintain that and increase it.
All right, thank you. Mr. Kilmer.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, and thanks, Chief, for being with us. It's helpful to get an understanding of your priorities. And I actually look forward to seeing you later today at the celebration of the removal and restoration of the 1,000th culvert, which is certainly a big deal in our neck of the woods. So the district I represent, I grew up on the Olympic Peninsula, and that's the district that I represent. For people from other parts of the country, I often say I represent more trees than people when you add up the Park Service and the Forest Service. And certainly the presence of those forests are important both from a recreational standpoint and really important to our economy. And so I guess that's the nature of the questions I want to ask about. The Collaborative Forest Landscape Restoration Program, I think, is a good example of how government can be a partner with rural communities. Since 2010, you've seen the bringing together of groups that have occasionally been at loggerheads or have been button heads from the conservation community and from industry. And the consequence of that is nearly 1.5 million acres that have been treated to reduce the risk of fire, over over 84,000 acres of new timber sales. And we've just started one of these in our neck of the woods on the Olympic Peninsula, and it's cool to see groups that have traditionally been arguing with each other trying to work through some of these issues. And I guess my question is, if the Forest Service continues to see support from the House, is there any, because I like the idea of trying to reward good behavior, is there an opportunity to increase investments in new collaboratives rather than just supporting the ones that have already been launched?
Yes, we do have a legislative proposal to be able to expand the CFLR authority to be able to increase the funding from the $40 million to $80 million for future years. Without any question, it's been hugely successful for the points that you brought out. And then the other thing that members that work on these collaboratives, what they also share with me is that the other key difference is they're able to agree on large projects. Instead of working on a 500-acre or 1,000-acre project, they're able to reach agreement on treating, hey, we need to be looking at 10,000, 20, 30,000 or more acres at one time. That's the real difference. And it's just simply, it comes down to trust. You provide the opportunity for people to come together, to be able to share their concerns, express their values, where people then hear that, and they can build trust, and then we're able to move forward. When I look at the amount of acres that we're treating today versus what we were a few years ago, one of the biggest changes is that we've been able to build trust across the board from all the different diverse interests to the point that they recognize this is what the land needs. And yes, it creates a lot of economic benefits and jobs and biomass that's produced, but it's driven simply by what the land needs. And when you're focused on that, a lot of the controversy, it goes away.
Yeah, I think that's certainly what we're still early going, so we're trying to work through a lot of these things. And it's a bunch of people taking time out of just hide time, so appreciate that. Also wanted to ask about forest roads. This past winter, we've just had some very large storm events that, again, blew out culverts and washed out roads. And, you know, the concern is not just in terms of public access for recreational purposes. We also have folks who just live in these areas, and it just makes it hard for them to get to and from their homes. We've seen preliminary damage estimates submitted to the Emergency Relief for Federally Owned Roads Program, over $6 million. I guess I want to get to, you know, in an era where we're seeing more intense storms, how does the agency think about kind of proactively addressing this issue so that we're investing in infrastructure to deal with these severe weather events on the front end rather than seeing a bunch of people cut off, both in terms of recreational access and in terms of just being able to get to their home?
Well, part of it, on each of our forests, we've done a vulnerability assessment to understand with the changing climate, what do we need to expect, especially with large rain events, especially rain on snow events, which we get in your country quite often now. So that's allowed us to be able to identify that we need to, you know, in some places increase the size of these culverts, other places be able to remove the culvert and use a crossing or something like that. So those are the things that, you know, we've been proactive, and I appreciate you being a co-sponsor of the event, you know, this evening, to be able to celebrate that level of success. But those are the things that we can point to where we're making a difference. We're reducing the amount of erosion, we're improving fisheries, and more important, or as important, we're maintaining public access by being out in front of this.
Thanks. I got plenty more questions, but I want to defer to the rest of the committee. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Cole.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Chief. Appreciate the testimony. I have exactly the opposite problem of Mr. Kilmer. I have more people than trees, and probably more cows than people. So it's a very different kind of landscape. In fact, we see 5 trees together. We define that as a forest in Oklahoma. But we have very little federal land. You know, we've got Indian trust land, and it's frankly well managed by the tribes that hold it. We've got some military reservations that are obviously federal and well managed, but we don't, and a couple of wildlife preserves and 1 national park. So, but most of our land is in private hands. And I'm just curious, as I hear these problems like Mr. Stewart addressed, and I hear my colleagues from states that, you know, 85% of the land is federally owned. Do you have you manage over 190 million acres, and I think you do it very well with the resources that you have. But what is the merit of considering, should we be offloading some of this land? Do you see it in perpetuity staying as it is? I'm interested in your long-term view of what we do with the asset. Do we hold it as federal government, or is there merit, as some of my colleagues say, in returning this one way or another in a managed way into private ownership?
Well, I'll start with a quote from Gifford Pinchot, the first chief of this agency when this agency was created. And the quote is simply that national forests, they exist for one reason, and one reason only: the public wants them. The national forests were reserved from the public domain, majority of them, when Congress was petitioned, or the administration at that time, the president was petitioned to be able to withdraw these areas from the public domain because they were not okay with the amount of devastation, flooding that was occurring, et cetera. This lack of any management, this was back in the 1800s. And so that's what created the system of lands. And then there's a system of laws that Congress has passed, presidents have signed, and agencies have implemented on the ground to represent how the public wants these lands managed. Multiple Use Sustained Yield Act. Wonderful to read it, sounds perfect, but I'll tell you, it is really difficult to implement it on the ground. And it's one of the things that's different than how the states manage a lot of their lands, and of course private landowners, is that we have to find that balance of all these different uses versus being able to manage it for any single one use. So for me, I like the way that we have our system of ownership in this country. I think it provides all the benefits to the public.
Let me posture it again, and I'm not sure, it's not meant to be adversarial in any way. It's something I struggle with. We actually do have a lot of timberland in southeast Oklahoma. Most of that is privately held. And it was set up that way when the state was opened up. Frankly, a lot of the Indian tribes were sort of looted out of the land. We just had a big settlement on that, which we appreciate. But the land remains in private hands, and it's productive, a beautiful area. So what I'm wondering is, we clearly have systems that have come into being at different times, and it's one thing for me to think about what I want to do in my state. It's quite another to imagine what I just love having 80% of Nevada in federal hands. Well, I'm not sure people in Nevada want to do that. And I'm not suggesting the elimination of these, but is there time or a way to rethink whether or not we have the right portions? Because those questions, as Mr. Stewart suggested, are coming up, and they're coming up in a not very productive way, in my view. We have a lot of people caught in difficult circumstances, and they feel adversarial with their own government when they don't want to feel that way. So, how would we rethink some of these things, or should we, again? Because while it's true, we've created this system, it's an accident in the way we created. We didn't think about it that way from the beginning of the Republic. We didn't apply that set of standards to every state in the country, let alone every region in the country. Given that, is there some merit to think in some ways of divesting it, or would you argue we should essentially take the assets we have, continue to manage them, get better at it, provide the resources? I'm just wondering if there's ever any thought inside the federal government about the first principle, if you will. How much of this land should we own? How much should be in private hands and managed differently?
Well, I'm a strong advocate for our system of land ownership, and I think these lands should remain in public ownership. They're public lands. I'm concerned that when I hear proposals from states, I'm concerned, how would you pay for the management? What would prevent you from selling it off? And then the public
selling it off
loses.
is precisely what I'm suggesting. Not all of it,
Yeah.
but I'm suggesting. Well, I just think it's worth thinking about, and I'm just curious if the administration or anybody ever at least explores this as a realistic option. If it's no, it's like it is now, and we're going to think about managing things better and putting resources. That's one thing. If it's, do we ever go back and think, geez, how much do we need to hold? Where do we need to hold it, or is it just we're going to hold what we have in perpetuity?
Well, that's my position, and based on what I hear from the publics across the country, and I understand that there's pockets, and I want to focus on what we can do to address those issues so that we can do a better job, to address those concerns. But we're very fortunate in this country to have this legacy, this conservation legacy, and I'll tell you, in the future, when you think about that, close to 14% of the CO2 that's emitted every year in this country is sequestered in our forests. We need to be looking at how we can expand those forests. So the idea that we'd want to do anything to lose some of these lands to some form of development, we got to understand those consequences. Because as I look forward into the future, I'll tell you, it's going to be so important for us to be able to maintain and actually expand our forests, if for no other reason, just for air quality. They do an incredible job to sequester carbon, and then when we can have sustainable harvest, we also sequester it into these wood products. And so it's going to be something that's going to become even more important for this country and actually for the world.
Let me make this last point. You've been very generous, Mr. Chairman. Again, and my intent, I want you to be, is not to question you or to express sympathy with some of the types of actions that we've had and that you have to deal with. I don't think that's ever an acceptable thing. But I do think at some point, you've very articulately outlined your position, but I would like, some study as to, because again, we don't hold the same balance of lands regionally across this country. And I'm not in an area that's directly affected by this for the most part. But I do think when we own 1 out of 5 acres in the country is federally owned, that to me is worth thinking about, particularly when it's concentrated in a relatively small number of states, and enormously, 50, 60, 70% of the state being owned by the federal government is pretty difficult on the people that live there. And whether or not we should redistribute that would be a fair question too. But again, you've been very generous, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much, and thank you, Chief.
Thank you. Ms. Penegry.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you Chief, for your testimony today, and certainly interesting to see the breadth of issues that we have in all the diverse states. As you know, I represent Maine, which is in New England, and we have very little presence of public lands, and we're fortunate that we have more water than drought. So we are not one of the states that are so deeply affected by the fires, but I do appreciate the challenges that you're dealing with, and I hope that's one of the things that we can tackle in this committee, is to have that funding be more stabilized, so the rest of the funding that many of us care about is better available to us and certainly more predictable. I'm sorry I have to go to another hearing, and I'll give you a few questions for the record, but I'll just quickly ask you about a very different kind of issue that I think the Forest Service has been handling well in terms of the back and forth, and that's the northern long-eared bat. So we have a lot of forest in our state, and we have a lot of timber harvesting, but it's of course all private land. But this has been a big concern for the Forest Service, Fish and Wildlife, as well as our timber harvesters, and we're particularly concerned that you are able to maintain the balance of dealing with the private landowners, the small landowners, the loggers themselves. As you know, this is a issue where the bat has been troubled by the white nose syndrome, the fungal disease. So there was some question about whether they would be listed as endangered, and the Wildlife Services listed them as threatened, which gives a little bit more wiggle room. And I know some of that was controversial, as there were those who wanted it to be endangered, but this gives us a little bit of a middle ground, in that you're now working on a tag and release program that is currently level funded. So I just want to talk a little bit about that, because what's critically important in my state is that we continue to ensure this coordination with the local woodlot owners. So if you could just briefly tell us about how you're doing as a result of that 2015 study that you did, how you work with other agencies, probably particularly Fish and Wildlife is being coordinated. Will you be able to continue to fund this work under the budget request for forest and rangeland research at last year's level, and just how you will continue that cooperation, since that's one of the things that we certainly hear about from our landowners?
Well, first, we'll continue that level of funding, and we have a great partnership with several universities that's helping to find solutions to the white nose syndrome, and we are actually making some progress on it. But then also, when it comes to managing our forests, there are certain roost trees that are important to be able to maintain those and not impact the bats. But we've been able to work with Fish and Wildlife Service to be able to say, well, we can adjust some operations here and still be able to get in there and be able to manage our forests and not impact those bats. So I feel really good about the work we've done together with Fish and Wildlife Service. And once again, what really helps us is that they understand the benefit of the forests. And they understand that if we're not managing these forests, then we're going to lose those, and we're going to lose the bat habitat. Or, in your case with private land, it gets developed. And you're fortunate that you haven't had as much pressure as the rest of this country, but it's starting in your state too. And I'll tell you, it's so essential that we find ways to be able to maintain our private forested lands. It's the majority of forests in this country. Over 50% of our forests are private. It's essential that we maintain those.
Absolutely, and I appreciate you saying that, because you're right. In our case, it's not the pressure from the federal government or the publicly owned land, but it's very important to people in our state, and I think in the region, that much of this land continues to be able to be harvested for timber or pulpwood or the variety of uses, and development pressure is certainly growing in our area. I think when you look at a map of the East Coast, and you often, you see all the bright lights of the East Coast, and you finally get to northern Maine and you see a little bit of darkness, and that means that we have some of the last preserved forest. But that will only stay there if people are able to make it economically viable for those communities. And so we appreciate your moderation in this and the ability to work with you. So thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Jenkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chief, welcome. As we've talked before, I think West Virginia has a good relationship with the Forest Service, and we appreciate you. 125,000 private landowners. I'm sorry. Good morning again. As you know, West Virginia, I think, has a good relationship with the Forest Service, and sounds a little loud. The 125,000 private landowners, about 80% of our forests are privately owned, as we've been talking about here. I want to ask you about the Forest Service Stewardship Program. Under the proposed fiscal year budget that we're talking about, there's over $500,000 cut suggested in that program. We think this program provides a lot of technical support. It's an important tool. It's been successful. Can you give me a rationale for why the proposed cut to what we see as an important program that provides much-needed services?
So our request does not result in a reduction, but what it does do, it moves some of those funds into our landscape scale restoration budget line item. And once again, this is where we've taken funds from stewardship, from forest health on state lands, our urban community forest funding. And we put that together in one account so to create a better way for the state foresters to be able to compete for that funding and be able then to address all these issues across the board versus we have this pot of money to be able to address urban community. We have this pot of money for forest stewardship. We have this pot of money for forest health. And so it's an area where actually, based on the success that we had last year, we're increasing our request in FY17 to be able to expand this. And we have good support from our state foresters because they're seeing that this is actually helping them to be, one, to be competitive, and they also see that it's actually helping them to get more work done on the ground.
And of course, the Farm Bill directed state foresters to take a comprehensive look at forests. Can you help me understand how the Forest Service and the National Forests are working with state foresters to accomplish the objectives and priorities detailed in the state action plans and what's been asked for under the Farm Bill?
Well, once again, the states have done a great job to put together their action plans that we worked with them starting a few years ago to help them to be, it shows where their priority is, where they need to really focus their work. And because of those action plans, it allows them to be more competitive for these limited funds. It also has allowed them to work across state lines. So we have several state foresters now that are working with their adjacent states and are putting together these large-scale projects that compete very well for these limited funds and thus be able to get more work done.
My last question is that as one of the few kind of eastern members here that have substantial national forests in their district, I've been monitoring how the agency's agenda applies to our forests. Last year, for one of the questions for the record that I submitted was asking about the most recent forest plan monitoring update for the Monongahela National Forest. When we talked last year, I saw that update was last updated back in 2011, which is on the web. And in response to my questions for the record, I was advised that the update would be done by May of 2015. But I've just checked, and it appears as though, again, for the Monongahela National Forest, we still do not have any forest plan monitoring update. Can you tell me why we can't get that updated, why we missed the May 2015 promise, and where we stand on that?
Well, I appreciate our folks being optimistic about how much work they can get done, but it's one of the areas where we, another area that we lack the funding, the capacity to be able to maintain the monitoring. One of the things we are doing under the new forest plan rule, it allows us or gives the direction for us to be able to do these monitoring plans in a more collaborative effort so that we can use others to help us to be able to get that work done. So that'll be able to expand it. As to why they didn't get your forest done, I will get back and find out, because if they made the commitment, they should have followed through with it. But it is an area that in the past we haven't done the job to monitor. And so it's so important for us to really understand what's going on, and if our decisions in our forest plan are proving out, that's great. if they're not producing what we expected, we need to know that so that we can make changes. So it's important that we do it, and I will get back to you on the status of that.
Monongahela is very important, obviously, in my district and throughout the entire region, so we welcome the feedback, and we continue to look forward to working with you. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Mr. Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here today, Chief. And before I ask some questions, I got a few that I'd like to ask. I do want to respond to something that Mr. Cole brought up, legitimate questions he asked about the amount of ownership of federal land in western states, and I guess Mr. Amadei and I could probably have a discussion for some time, and often do on the floor, about this. But let me tell you why people live in Idaho. They live in Idaho because they love their public lands. They like access to them for recreation, for hunting, for fishing, for all the activities that they do on public lands. And there is always this movement to turn them over to the states and let the states manage them. Well, you could do some cooperative management between the feds and the states, but like any landlord relationship, you're always PO'd at the landlord. You know, I mean, that's a reality of what happens. If we turn them over to the state, we'd be PO'd at the state. And the reality is like I said, you could do some cooperative management between the states and the feds, and we've been working on some of those cooperative types of arrangements. But let me tell you what happens when you sell those public lands. We just sold 30,000 acres in Idaho to a couple of Texans. It was a lot of fun. And they all of a sudden denied access. So all of a sudden people can't access their favorite fishing hole or their hunting grounds. And in Idaho, that doesn't mean you just go around the 30,000 acres. It means you get a helicopter and have to go over it, or come in from the other side from Montana. And that's a problem. And that's why we like our public lands. Like I say, we're always PO'd at the land managers, and we always will be, even if we manage them ourselves, because, you know, it's like a quarterback in a football game. We can always do better than the guy out there on the field. So that's my answer to that question. That was a friendly question. No, it's a legitimate question. It's a legitimate debate that's going on in Idaho. It really is. And Idaho and all of the West. But let me ask you now a couple questions. First, the wildfire fighting. Thank you for your support on the bill and trying to get this through. I'm sorry that we didn't get it, the cap adjustment bill, through in the omnibus, but we did, thanks to Chairman Cole, Chairman Calvert, and the members of this committee, get $1 billion in additional funding. Let me make one recommendation. Do not do any transfers this year. Any transfers this year for wildfire fighting. Because what I always hear from people as I go up and talk to them about it is, well, yeah, so they have to transfer funds, but they seem to handle it okay. So where's the urgency? Well, this $1 billion will run out eventually. And while this does solve the transfer problem probably for a year, maybe 2 years, depending on how, maybe 3 years, depending on how long the well,
1 year.
1 year, okay. It'll solve it for this year. It doesn't solve the long-term problem that we need to do, that we need to fix. And if you do transfers this year, that will be a problem in trying to convince other people. But in your budget request, you ask for, what was that amount? You asked for $874 million in discretionary funds and requested $864 million is requested through a budget cap adjustment. Why do you put an amount in there?
Well, it's because there's instead of asking for just, I mean, we feel we need to have an amount, and that's our prediction based on what we see is kind of like the highest need. So that there's some assurance, so it's just like there isn't an endless fund. And we don't want to be asking for more authority than what we need.
Well, the assumption is you're not going to ask for more funds in a cap adjustment than what you're going to need to fight the fires. But what if it goes to $1 billion? You only ask for $864 million, then you're going to be back into transfers, and that's what we're trying to avoid is transfers.
You're correct, but it's our effort to try and put this in a way so that it actually builds some support, because we've heard some criticism from others, but that's based on our kind of our high projection, kind of like this would be the max. And you take last year, the 1.7, well, that's kind of where it was. That was at our high end. So we're pretty good on the extremes, and actually, I mean, we can tell you the maximum it'll probably be, and that's what kind of drives that. But you raise a legitimate question about what if things don't work out, what if things really shift, El Nino shuts down, et cetera, and in 17 we could be faced with circumstances that were like last year. You know, it may not be. So it's.
But my whole
it's-
goal in this is try to stop the transfers is what we're trying to do. And people keep saying that we want to spend more money on wildfires, and it's hard to convince some people that no, what we want to do in the long run is spend less money on wildfires. And we do that through proper management and by not transferring all the funds and everything. Could you tell me a little bit about where we stand with the air tankers and stuff that we authorized at one point in time because of the Forest Service? You mentioned the number of contract planes you're going to have, but how many C-130s do we have out there?
Well,
And where are we with that?
With the transfer of the planes from the Air Force, you know, to the Forest Service, we flew one of those C-130s last year. It will have one this year. We will not have all of them operational until 2019. We do have our next generation planes that are on exclusive use contracts. We also still have our legacy. So this coming year, we'll have 21 large air tankers under contract. There's probably another 4 or 5 that we could call up when a call we needed, plus we have our MAFS planes with the Air Force and Air National Guard to be able to provide. So we're in good shape. We're also moving forward with the acquisition of an aircraft. We have completed our aviation business case. It's my understanding that O&B has indicated they're going to sign off on that, so we plan to move forward with the acquisition of that aircraft this year.
One quick question, if I could, Mr. Chairman. Last year, the committee added language that directed the Forest Service and the BLM to conduct risk contact analysis, engage ARS, and convene a meeting among interested stakeholders to discuss solutions, among other things, on the domestic sheep, wild sheep issue. Could you provide me an update on how that's going?
Well, we're working with ARS and the BLM and others to be able to understand what is the real risk. And then more importantly, to sit down with the states to be able to identify, okay, where's the highest risk? Where are the places we need to make sure that we maintain bighorn sheep? What are some of the other areas where there's less risk and there may be a greater need for the domestic sheep? And to be able to reach agreements. So this is how we're going to work with the states. They manage the bighorn sheep. We want to be able to carry out our responsibility to ensure viability of bighorn sheep populations, but at the same time do this in a way we're working together and prevent, you know, sheep introduction, bighorn sheep introductions into places that creates, you know, more problems into the future. But if we can come to agreement and have a plan, you know, have a state plan so that we're all together on this, and we know that, okay, these areas we're going to you know, maintain separation, so to maintain that bighorn. This area over here, we may have some flexibility, and you know, the state may be, you know, if that's maybe not the best bighorn habitat anyway, and so that's an area domestic sheep, you know, should take have the priority on it. But this is something we're going to work through it on the states, and we're making, I think, some good progress in your state.
Thank you.
Mr. Amadei.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Chief, good to see you. I don't want to pick sides between Simpson and Cole, but since you're supposed to lead follower, get out of the way. The House passed last year a bill that was generated from the Carson Ranger District through the Humboldt-Toyabe that proposed to get rid of lands that were in holding, small chunks,
Tracts.
not manageable as part of the forest generally. Forest Service supported it, administration supports it. Can you talk to somebody in the Senate about getting off their ass and moving that? You don't need to answer that, but anyhow, something to think about. And I was in the Carson Ranger District last week, and I know your history goes through a Ranger District in central Nevada, so I want to talk with you about the firefighting stuff. I'm looking at the budget request this year, and I see that the line items, which have been held kind of actually at flat funding for the last few years for local cooperation, state and federal stuff, have been, we got forest stewardship, and we've also got state fire assistance and volunteer fire assistance, have been at level funding. And while in this environment there's some days where level funding is a victory, I look at what's happened in the services budget over the last few years, and level funding is sometimes a precursor to getting zeroed out. I wash that against your statements about, hey, we ought to use closest resource regardless of what it is, blah, blah, blah. We don't need to have the discussion here in terms of the importance of initial attack and cooperation with local and state authorities and all that other sort of stuff. And so as I sit here and look at fuels and fire and all that other sort of stuff, and it's just another moving part of the puzzle, but you're going, hey, why are we level funding these folks while we're proposing to increase suppression? And you get into that whole argument in terms of, do we put it in suppression, do we put it in prevention, do we put it in thinning? Although you said today, hey, thinning's a good thing, and I agree with you. But I'm sitting here looking at this going, state assistance, by the way, in a state that you're not the BLM, and I know you're thankful for that every day, and I think you're right. But it's like, hey, for the communities that the Humboldt-Toyabe plays a large part in, this volunteer and through the state forester stuff is pretty important stuff. So I would like, my question is, can I get together with Tom Hubbard and the folks in your shop who developed that to have a better understanding of why that's level as we go forward in the discussion of this committee for that line item? Because it's not sex and violence. Nobody's going to be able to make a commercial out of it. But in terms of operational, I think it's an important thing to take a look at. Can we get together offline?
Yes, and also I agree with you. And you'll also notice that our preparedness request, that's not going up either, because the need to put any discretion we have into paying the bill for fire suppression, it limits our ability to be able to be proactive and be preventive. Your point, we depend on our volunteer fire agencies throughout the country, not only in your state, but in Mr. Cole's state. That's our first defense. And so this statewide fire assistance is so important for us to be able to help those folks maintain their qualifications and also have the equipment so that they can safely be able to carry out the initial attack. They do the majority of initial attack in this country. When you look at that, the number of fires we had last year, the majority of them are on private ground. Yeah. And so we work together. But your points are well made.
Possibility, I know there was a pilot of using drones out there so that we hit the fire right, we save life, we can react in real time. Would you, have money in the budget for more robust work with that? Yeah. It's amazing. They're amazing what they can do because it's real time.
We are looking at how we can effectively use that technology. We've had some success in the past when we've used the military's craft in Mr. Calvert's state to be able to use that. So we're having to work that through also with FAA so that it can be part of the technology that we're using. One of the challenges that we have is that technology provides so much information that we got to find a way to be able to manage that, because we are looking at stuff. We need information instantaneously. We don't have the ability to look at a lot of different data. So that's one of the things we're also working at, is to be able to, what is the information we really need to collect, and then to be able to have the system that collects that. Because otherwise, I mean, it's incredible what's out there, and especially with the technology that the military's provided a few times. We had a large fire in California a couple years ago where we were using an unmanned aircraft that was able to look through the smoke and identify. We actually had some hot spots that were outside the line, and our infrared flights wouldn't have picked them up until that night, but we were able to actually pick it up right then and during the day. So it's definitely a tool that we're going to be using, but we're going to have to be working together and also make sure the public's okay with it, because then it raises those questions. And at the same time, we can't have the public fly in theirs, because we've had operations where we've had to shut down our air tanker operations and our helicopters because of unsafe. So it's going to take a little while for us to work through this so that we can use the tool to help us, but at the same time the public can be reassured we're not doing it for anything but checking on the fire.
We got plenty of drones in Nevada. We fly them all over Area 51 all the time.
No, we don't, Mr. Chairman. and actually, that's I'd kind of like at some point in time just an update, because there was report language saying, hey, helicopter test in 2014, blah, 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 how's that going? So what we'll do when we set that up for whoever you do, we'll make sure that all committee members are aware so that they can either attend or send staff.
Thank you.
finally, I want to talk with you a little bit about the large air tanker program, because I've looked at the 2002 report after we had some bad stuff, and then your modernization stuff, and I'm looking at the thing where you're getting Coast Guard C-130s and going to do all that stuff, and I have kind of a concern, because the 2002 report says, hey, military long haul and whatever aircraft are under different load and stresses than basically close air support in a firefighting role, especially when the fire's big and not an initial attack trying to paint a line around a smaller area and all the weather that goes with the fire. And I look at the C-130 stuff and I'm going, do we have the initial records with this from the Coast Guard, or is it Groundhog Day? Yeah. And so I have a concern about that with the FAA certification in terms of public use, specified. Mm-hmm. And so I want to go over that more extensively offline, but I mean, help me with, isn't this what we were doing in 2002, that blue ribbon panel said, you got to quit doing this, you got to instrument them, and you got to...
On the wings to make sure we're not having any stress fractures or metal fatigue in those planes. So the C-130s that are provided by the private contractors, they're able to meet those. All of our new aircraft are meeting these. Our aircraft are going to meet these qualifications. It just provides that additional assurance. And FAA is, it's airworthy to go from point A to point B, but that's a very different mission from what we do.
Okay, so I'll look forward to talking with you more about that later. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Joyce.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Morning, Chief.
Good morning.
Well, I got to tell you that one of the most stunning things to me, being from Ohio when I got on this committee, was the amount of money we do spend on fire suppression and protection. But in Ohio, obviously, we have a different problem, and I noticed we were talking about flat funding, and certainly for the Health Management Cooperative Lands Fund being flat funded, we also have an aggressive problem there with the emerald ash borer.
Yes.
And we've now found that the emerald ash borer has gone through other types of trees.
Yes.
Including in Ohio, they found it on the white fringe tree.
Mm-hmm.
That's a new one to me. But, and I was wondering what, if anything, that you plan to do with the flat budgeting to help continue to protect and help local communities fight the emerald ash scourge.
Well, we continue to work with APHIS. They're probably our key partner on this to be able to identify a solution. That being said, right now with the emerald ash borer, about the only thing we're having some success if we can get out in front of it and basically reduce the host trees, we can slow down the spread. That's very difficult when it's going through a community. People don't want to lose their ash trees, but the reality, right now you're going to lose them one way or another. So this is an area that our scientists have been working on. We just haven't been able to come up with the solution. We are having some success to be able to do spraying in certain areas. So if there's certain places to be able to make that investment, the insecticide that we're using seems to have having some good success, but it's a very expensive approach. So we need to continue our research. It's just one of the realities that we had emerald ash borer around for quite a few years in this country, and then we stopped having cold winters, and all of a sudden they've spread it all the way up into Canada now. So, it's one of the things. It just indicates what we're up against, and we're going to be able to find. I think we'll be able to find a solution to it. And then the other thing we're working on is through genetics to be able to actually develop a species of ash that can resist the emerald ash borer too, and so that may also be helpful, so we can come back in and replant ash. They're a fast-growing tree, et cetera, but those are the things we continue to work on. I'd like to be able to have more funding. I'd like to be able to increase that, but I can say that about everything that we're doing, and I understand the realities of where we are today with our budget concerns, and so we're doing our best to prioritize our requests.
Level funding in some instances is a victory.
Yeah, well,
in this building.
It is. At times it is.
Right. Ian, have you noticed it spreading to other trees as well in your research?
Yeah, our scientists have, and I'd be glad to get back with you and just provide you a full list of it. But we're seeing this with some of the other invasives too that predominantly on one species, they too adapt. And especially when they start losing their host tree, they're there, and especially if they're in the numbers, they start moving into different species. So we're seeing that with a variety of species, and it's one of the things the Canadians are very concerned about, especially if some of our invasives start moving into like sugar maple. They're very concerned about the impact, not only here in this country, but also to our neighbor to the north. Those are the things we're up against, is to be able to slow down these infestations, and then also to stay in front of it, so that if we, in this case, we come up with a fix with ash, but at the same time the borer has already moved on to a different species, then we're just in the chase, and we need to get out in front of it.
You hit on a good point there with the sugar maples, because that's a big industry in our area
It is,
as well. And the source of fires in our neighborhood mostly take place in fireplaces.
Mm-hmm.
And over the years, it's been hardwoods, but
Yeah.
it seems ash is everything that everybody's burning now,
yeah.
because it's going down at tremendous speed. I want to follow up on that. In the Urban Community and Forestry Program, there's a decrease of $4.354 million. So while necessarily, I understand that cuts have to be made, but can you explain to me, with the importance of urban forests to our growing urban populations, why that fund would take a 15% cut?
Well, once again, there isn't a reduction in our request. It's just to move that amount of money into this landscape scale restoration account that allows the state foresters to have more flexibility. And what we found last year with the funds that were available in that account, the projects, about 30% of the funding was actually spent on urban community forests. So the state foresters are recognizing the need there, and so it gives them more flexibility. So we haven't reduced our request. We've just moved some of the money into this other account. But based on what we saw last year, it probably will actually increase the amount of funding that's going into urban and community forests. 83% of Americans now live in an urban setting, and we have over 130 million acres of urban forests in this country. That's a huge asset if you think about the carbon that's being sequestered, the water that's being filtered, the quality of life. All our research shows you plant trees, your property value goes up, crime goes down, you save energy. I mean, it's an incredible resource that we have, but we got to stay on top of these invasives. Otherwise, it becomes so expensive to maintain it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Ms. McCullum, any further questions?
Kind of briefly, first I'd like to point out, and I'm very pleased of the funding that's in for the Office of International Forestry programs, because doing the detection right not only helps us get ahead or stop invasive species sometimes from coming in. So that's very, very, very important. Kind of tying things together, and I have to agree with Mr. Simpson when I'm right on if you look at Minnesota, we're right on the cutting edge where the forests start building up again. And the one thing that we've lost in the metropolitan area, and we are fighting very hard to keep, is public access for swimming, recreation, sailing, fishing, and that. So we're very, very protective of our public lands. So which gets to, I'd like you to talk a little more about this Good Neighbor Authority Master Agreement. You have one with Chippewa and Superior National Forest with the Minnesota Department of DNR. And also, when you mentioned the marijuana eradication, one of the things our National Guard was doing before it was so heavily redeployed over and over again, both in Iraq and Afghanistan, was to get some of the flying time in, and that was to look and to work with the Minnesota DNR as well as our National Forest about some of the things that were going on with marijuana. Can you maybe talk a little bit about some of these state-to-state agreements that you have going on with the Forestry Service, and how effective that is in saving money and maybe heading off tensions in the future?
Okay. So the Good Neighbor Authority is something we've had for a couple states for quite a few years, and then with the last Farm Bill, it was expanded across the country. And so we now have, I think, 10 or 11 states where we have an agreement in place. And what it does, it allows us to be able to work with the state, to be able to look at projects that or maybe that go beyond the national forest, or in some cases just on the national forest, and be able to use state resources to help us get more work done. And then the receipts that come off of that are then available for us to then do additional work. And so it's one of the areas that I think when we talk about the, some of the tension between, state management or for the Forest Service should manage the public lands, these are the sort of things that I want to spend our time on, because initially we're having good success to be able to increase the capacity, actually get more work done, and by working with our states. And so it's like everything, we're in a learning process. Not every project's going to probably work out as well as we did hope at initially, but over time, I think it's going to be another way for us just to get some additional work done. It's also it's helping, I think, address this question about, is there better ways for us to work together? And this is one of the authorities that I think is going to really prove out to be really helpful. And I want it to be able to go beyond just forest restoration. I think there's a lot of things that we can be doing working together with the states under this authority besides just forest restoration, but that's our primary goal right now. As far as with the marijuana, we use the Air National Guard units a lot in places to be able to fly people in, and in the past have been able to clean up. But they too, states have, a lot of their guard have been deployed and don't have the capacity they used to. And so this additional request allows us to be able to be really a better partner, so that we're not just always asking, but we can also be there as a partner to do these cleanup operations.
Thank you.
Thank you. One quick thing we mentioned technology, and our staff was out in California, and they witnessed that your employees are kind of jerry-rigging their own technologies. At some point, they're using their iPads or iPhones. There's no real policy or guidelines that are set how to utilize that technology probably more effectively. I do know, as you mentioned, we did use that Predator on that rimfire.
Mm-hmm.
If you remember, we had a hell of a time getting permission to unleash that technology. I had to call the Secretary of Defense. At that time was Chuck Hagel, and it was in the airplane, and to tell him to please sign a memo that's floating around that airplane someplace to allow us to get that Predator on site. Since then, have there been any conversations with the Department of Defense to have a more efficient, effective way when the fire first starts? Because I've been told if you can get that resource up there immediately, it helps direct the aircraft, find the hot spots, maybe put out the fire quicker because they can't see that through the smoke, and using that technology to interface that with firefighters that are on the ground with their iPads and iPhones, where they can immediately know where they need to be and where to go and where to communicate to.
Mr. Chairman, it's one of the things we do need to sit down with folks in the defense to be able to get something in place when we need that. Ideally, we'll be able to develop different unmanned flying aircraft that we can use. Predators are very expensive, and it goes way beyond anything we need. But right now, it's one of the tools. So your point is well taken. I'll ask the staff to be able to look at what we can have in place until we can get our program established, because when the state requests it, it's being flown at the direction from the governor, and then we need people like yourself for your support, then we're able to do it. But we need to be able to have that so that when there is a situation, it's just like here it is, it's available.
And it's not just, in San Diego, when we had those fires, we couldn't get the Marine Corps to use their helicopters and to do spotting, and it took us 2 days.
Yes.
I remember that, to get permission to use those, and the Marines wanted to do it, but they had to get a sign-off from here in town, and it was just sometimes 2 days is a critical period of time where we couldn't use those spotters to bring in the air resources to put that fire out.
We're doing a better job now to be able to quickly justify using the military aircraft, so that we're not violating the Economy Act that requires us to use the contracted aircraft first, and we have all those committed. So, but We're learning how to be a little bit more nimble on that so that we can provide the insurance that, yeah, we're not violating the Economy Act. There's an urgent need, and yes, it may only be for a day, but we need it now. All of our other aircraft are committed, in other places of the country. So I think in the future we'll be able to have those resources available much faster than what we've had in the past.
Good. Okay, I know we have a defense hearing coming up. Is there any other questions that, Mike?
If you don't mind, I'd just like to ask one question, if I could. Your grazing fee proposal, tell me about it.
Well, it's a proposal to charge, have an additional charge above the grazing fee of $2.50 per head out
And
there.
what's the grazing fee, what's the AUM now?
It was $1.65 last year, and I think it's going up to, actually it goes up the maximum 25%, so somebody can do the math here.
So this would be more than double.
Yes. And the money would then be used for us to be able to address the backlog of administration, and then also to be able to move forward on implementing the Rescission Act to get the allotment management plan NEPA done. It's a proposal to find a way to be able to move forward, to be able to assure that we're doing our job to make sure we can continue to graze, and at the same time to deal with the budget complications. I mean, ideally, I wish we could be just asking, for an increase in grazing. It's one of the issues that had been brought up with Mr. Stewart. We have so few folks out there where we used to be able to sit down and have the discussions with permittees and county commissioners and basically a lot of one-on-one discussions. We just don't have the folks there anymore. And so that's one of the things that's added to some of the complications that we're seeing. So it's a proposal to be able to collect some additional fees, and when I look at what most states charge, we still are going to be less than what states charge for
Would
the
this
grazing.
Provide for full cost recovery for the administration of the program?
I'd have to get back to you on that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chairman. I have one question. You mentioned in your opening remarks the value of stewardship contracting in terms of taking revenue from timber sales, plowing it back into that forest. Unfortunately, that works only on stewardship contracts, not on other other timber sales. It's my understanding that the Forest Service actually has authority that was expanded in 2005 under the KV authority, the Knutson-Vandenberg authority, but the service doesn't really use it. So that doesn't make sense to me. Can you tell me why?
We are using our authority under the KV, Knutson-Vandenberg. Yeah, we've been using that for years. Part of the problem that we're running up against is today we have 50% or fewer foresters today than what we used to. And so we have these different authorities, but we need to have people that can first understand it and be able then to implement it. We're getting to the point now where we have a lot of NEPA-ready projects. They're ready to go forward to be able to restore forests, but we don't have the staff to be able to get out on the ground because of the reductions that have occurred over the last decade. So it's one of the things through the Good Neighbor Authority that would allow us to be able to make full use of our authorities, and be able to increase the capacity. But through our authorities under the KV plan, it's one of the things that we do implement that. The difference, though, with our stewardship contracting, and we're doing about 30% of our forest management work now under stewardship, is it creates, there's a greater level of trust. And I can get the same result on the ground whether I use a timber sale or a stewardship contract. I do get the same result on the ground. I use a stewardship contract. There's a higher level of trust with folks that sometimes are concerned with what we're doing. And so it requires a collaborative effort. It also, the other key difference is that with a stewardship contract, we address all the needs of that landscape together at one time versus a timber sale. We'd cut the trees, use KV funds to come in there and do some restoration work, etc. A stewardship contract provides that that certainty, that guarantee that we're going to address all the needs on the landscape under one contract versus, yes, we'll do the timber sale and trust us, we'll get around to doing the work that you're really interested in. So those are the two differences. And so we want to use all of our authorities, but that's the key benefit with the stewardship contract. And we can do some of the same things under the KV, but we just haven't been able to build that level of trust that we need to be able to continue to move forward.
Thanks. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. I know there's a number of other questions. We'll submit them for the record, and I discussed before some groundwater issues that I'd like to get on the record also. So any questions, please submit them, and we'll get them answered in a timely fashion by the chief. I appreciate your being here today, Mr. Dixon. We appreciate you being here today, and we're adjourned.
Thanks, Chief.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chief. Appreciate it, Chief. Thanks, Chairman. Let me ask you a question.